Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 358 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Mom versus Lyme, an interview with Isabel Rose. My name is Daisy White, and my co-host is Rich Johansson, who is my dear friend of a couple years who has been the co-creator of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. I've had the fortune and great pleasure of being Isabel Rose's health advocate. And through the years, I've learned so much from her as she has graciously battled her journey through Lyme disease as well as through chronic depression. And it has been a great pleasure to watch how she has navigated those waters with grace and ease. Also, I've learned so much from her as she has transformed her journey into her own Lyme, helping other mothers against Lyme through her support groups, and how she mentors mothers and how she learns from those mothers to help her own children. So now, without further ado, I introduce to you Mom versus Lyme with Isabel Rose.
Hello, Isabel Rose, and welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Hi there.
We are really excited to have you. And in addition to having the Isabel Rose that we've been focusing on from Mothers Against Lyme and preparing to introduce to the community, I'm also blessed to have a special guest co-host today, Daisy White. Daisy, say hi to the folks.
Hi, everyone.
So, Isabel, why don't you take a minute to introduce folks to you, talk a little bit about your background, in addition to being one of the forces in the Lyme disease community. Talk a little bit about what you do professionally, what you've done professionally, and then sort of tell us a little bit about your background and your life as a East Coast child growing up and living in the Lyme Belt.
Okay. That covers a lot of ground.
It does.
I'm not young, and what's really significant about my story is that I was diagnosed with Lyme disease when I was 48. And as most people, many people are failing terribly. I had prepared my will. I had 2 children, neither of whom were well, and I thought, I'm going to die. What's going to happen? And actually, that very night when I finished preparing my will, Dana Parrish, a very dear friend of mine, happened to be over. Dana is her own force in the Lyme world.
She is, and a brilliant author.
But Dana and I knew each other because of my career. My first career was as, I guess it's called like triple threat. Threat, though, I'm not sure. I think maybe I don't know if that's a good word, but I was a writer, a performer, and a singer. And I made a movie that I wrote and I was in, and it was about a singer, and Dana Parrish's husband, Andy Hollander, scored my film. And so I met his wife and we became best friends. And she watched me basically nosedive from the highest point of my career, which was when Vogue magazine did a profile on me. The title was A Star is Born, and my movie was about to come out nationally, distributed by Samuel Goldwyn Company. I had a 2-book deal from Doubleday, and I had already turned my book, the novel that I had written, into a 1-woman musical, which was running off Broadway, starring me, and mostly because I just couldn't afford at the time to pay more performers. But that was sort of this, I had this sense like, oh my God, it's happening. I'm going to do it. I'm going to be able to take all of this creativity and send it into the world. And then really the disaster kind of struck, then struck and struck and struck and couldn't struck until, they didn't stop striking. It was a tsunami that hit me. And I went from, I think before the podcast started, we were chatting about my background at Yale. And, I was a summa cum laude Yale graduate. So I
All right,
graduated.
so let's pause there for a second, because it's important that we give folks a context for you, right? So you're and we're gonna bookmark your career and the development of your career, but you were at the peak of your career. You were pursuing your purpose. You were about to share all of your God-given talents with the world. I like the word triple threat. We can describe it in a lot of different ways. And then you had your crash, which we're gonna get to as we develop the podcast. But let's talk a little bit more about your background. So before you went to Yale, which of course is on the East Coast, and it is in very close proximity to Lyme, Connecticut, which is where this disease was allegedly discovered by a doctor who was employed by Yale University at the time. But let's walk back a little bit further, because you're a native New Yorker, and you spent a lot of time on Long Island, in Eastern Long Island, which is where we believe this epidemic began, and it's certainly where very close proximity to where the first ticks were dragged and ultimately sent to Willy Bergdorfer to be examined. So let's talk about that part of your journey first, because you are really the manifestation of Lyme disease and Tick Central, where you both grew up and you spent your pre-college and your college years.
Well, what's really significant about my childhood is that I actually didn't go to Eastern Long Island in my childhood. In my adulthood, I was bitten a jillion times there. Okay. But what's really significant here is that I grew up spending every weekend and all of my summers in Westchester County, 100 miles due south of Lyme, Connecticut. And in 1976, I was bitten by a tick after playing in a leaf pile. That was a rite of passage of the fall. If you lived in a part of the world, I think, where leaves fall, everyone would make a huge leaf pile. And the next day, I found a tick behind my ear. My dad kind of pulled it off. And that was that. It was the end of that conversation of a tick. I mean, and then about 2 weeks later, I woke up, or 10 days later, I woke up with an excruciating stiff neck. I couldn't go to school. The pediatrician was summoned. Back in those days, the pediatrician made house calls, but my Manhattan-based pediatrician would never have asked, about anything. He asked about my pillow and my mattress and what position I slept in. And then told me to stay home from school until it felt better. It didn't feel better, but staying home was boring. So I went back to school, and a couple of days later, the stiff neck came back, except this time I woke up in a pool of vomit. And I was burning up. In those days, you just thought, oh, she has the flu. It wasn't going around or anything. So I was, that was the beginning. And I also want to say that where I grew up in Rye, Mamaroneck, is where the bay shares with Montauk, with Gardiner's Bay. It rolls into my neighborhood where I grew up. And I actually strongly believe that my mother was most likely infected, but didn't have any idea. And she's never been, kind of properly assessed, or to her satisfaction. To my satisfaction, I think so. But, so it's possible that I kind of came out the gate with Lyme disease, but for sure I was bitten at 8. And that's, and it was before I ended up in Long Island.
So that whole rim, that Long Island, Westchester, Connecticut rim is where Lyme really took off in the late 60s and early 70s. And that's the window of time when you were there, right? I mean,
Yeah, what's devastating is that by 1976, 77, 78, when in quick succession, I suddenly had allergies where I had had none before, anxiety, tinnitus, extreme self-hatred setting in by the age of 10. There was, and in fact, a very strange sort of anxiety eating. It wasn't like an eating disorder. It's just that I would become anxious and vomit and without any kind of control, which I could never understand why. And now I have a framework for understanding why. That understanding didn't come until I was 48, for something happening at 10. But there was information available, but no one was connecting it. Certainly not in Manhattan. And
Well,
it's devastating.
It is, and I'm sorry you had that terrible experience, and I'm gonna unfortunately ask you to build that out for us a little bit. How was this affecting you socially? How is this affecting you educationally? And how did you manage the challenges that these developing symptoms are causing you, both socially and educationally?
Well, it's a great question. I happen to have been a good actress. And I'm also a middle child people pleaser. And it's funny, there's a word I now know from one of my autistic children who came to me kind of late and said, "Mommy, I realized I'm on the spectrum." And I said, well, I think I knew that, sweetie, but I didn't want to sort of bog it down with that label. And she said, well, Mom, it's really great for me to know I've been masking all these years. And did you know that girls mask more often than boys? And so I think about my daughter's answer in reference to your question to me. How did I deal? I wasn't, I didn't become, I didn't end up with autistic symptoms, though I have it, now with so much familiarity with the community, I do see frequently what I call Lyme-induced autism. I did not have that symptom myself. And I made it through with all of this depression, anxiety. I think all of a sudden I had warts covering my fingers that now I understand, but I couldn't understand the ringing in my ears, the shin splints. I would have these flares that would sort of race up my arms, burning flares, and they would go away. I could never run to a doctor and say, look, because there was nothing to see. When my knee started hurting me, I was a dancer, so I was diagnosed with chondromalacia. Nobody sort of thought, oh, a knee pain, Lyme disease. There just was no connection. And I'd say the real nightmares for me started a little bit later, probably after my 4th or 5th tick attachment. Because by then I was in either Daisy's alma mater. Daisy and I both went to Bennington, where I went to graduate school there. And Daisy, I don't know about you, but I rolled around in that grass an awful lot. So
the end of the world. It's
exactly.
called the world.
Yeah. So probably brought on by successive is my guess, right? It's anybody's guess, or perhaps by changing hormones over the course of my life or after my child. Is that I remember calling my mom one day and saying, I think there's something wrong with my brain.
How old were you then, Isabel?
I was probably 30. Or maybe 32. So I had already been able to write the movie and write the book, and everything was taking off, and I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't remember, my phone number. And I went to my doctor. My doctor said, well, it was right after my daughter was born, and probably that like huge, surge in hormones. I mean, Daisy, you might know more than I do about this, that the effect of hormones on kind of inciting activity. Would you say that happens?
Yeah, I think also, when one is pregnant, the immune system does a different thing. And then when you're not pregnant anymore, the immune system is back to itself. And it's oftentimes when people start to feel their symptoms that they didn't know they had.
So I went to my doctor, and my doctor said, well, you have mommy brain. I mean, listen, I like many, possibly the majority of people in the Lyme community, I was gaslit for 40 years. I was told that I was premenstrual. The favorite that people love to give me because I was a performer was, oh, you're so dramatic. Which is an insult to those people who are creative. And
but there's a little more there, Isabel, right? Because we've sort of touched on your education, but I do want to build out one more piece that we were working on, and that is, despite you being sick for your entire childhood, you ultimately went to Yale University, and despite you being very humble about your university experience, only geniuses go there. Very few people get in, and you had to have a lot of challenges with your health that you had to grit through in order to be able to perform at a high level to get into a school like that. So talk to us about what that experience was like, because it's amazing to me that you would have been able to perform educationally at such a high level to get into a school like Yale University, despite being chronically ill.
I probably would not have gotten in today for a variety of reasons. I'm not sure I'm their ideal candidate anymore, but I have always been, Daisy knows this of me, I've always been a really hard worker. And my work ethic and just sort of my sheer drive has gotten me pretty far. I think that I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning before a test and make sure, I don't know, and this is painful for me. I really had an incredible memory, and that was my calling card. So I know you want to stay there. I'm going to fast forward for a minute to what it felt like to be on stage. And I was performing at a nightclub at the time. I'm a cabaret singer. I was singing in a nightclub called Joe's Pub in New York. Huge sold out crowd. Opening number. It was a song I've sung 8 million times, and the lyrics left my head. And it wasn't like I kind of forgot them, and it was as if a trap door opened up to my memory, and I fell into free fall like a cartoon character, just like And it happened 2 more times in that show. And I had always been not only did I have a really good memory, but I was always really comfortable in front of a crowd. Like that, I'm happier in front of a crowd than I am probably, walking into like a small party or something. Like my happy place is performing. And afterwards, people, my husband said, I'm sure it was your nerves. And again, I just thought, I know, but I don't have those. And I was singing, and then it happened again. I was doing the one-woman show. I actually had to cancel a performance once because I passed out. Another time right before a set, this was the end of my career, which I'm slowly making my way back to right now. I lost consciousness right before going on stage for a different nightclub gig. And I cracked my head on the floor because I landed on it. And I did 2 sets anyway. So you asked me, how did I get through Yale or get into Yale? I think I was quite blessed with an incredible life force. I mean, a chi, whatever you want to call it. And also this extreme passion I have for music, for communication, for learning is the thing that's kept me afloat. It's what saved me, I think, because after my diagnoses, I did what I knew how to do. I started learning.
All right. So I do want to talk to you about having having a relationship with your spirit and your body and being able to continue to progress despite your body betraying you. But let's bookmark that for another moment, and let's focus a little bit on the gaslighting piece, right? Because this is an important conversation we have to have, because just about everyone on this podcast either has been gaslit or is going to be gaslit, and it's something you have to learn how to manage when you're working with medical professionals, because there are a very small number of Lyme literate medical doctors, and it's almost impossible to get into them, and it's quite frankly impossible in most cases to financially afford them. So our community has to learn how to manage the general medical system, and they have to learn how to manage the gaslighting. So talk a little bit about what it was like to be gaslit during this phase of your life before your diagnosis, and talk to me about how it could be that doctor after doctor would gaslight you, of all people. You went to Yale University. You're a very, very smart Ivy League educated woman. If they're going to gaslight you and call you mommy brain or whatever it is that they were calling you, then the rest of us are certainly in a very difficult position. So talk about the gaslighting and talk to us about how you think folks can manage the gaslighting so they can still get the medical services that they need from the system.
First of all, I have a vagina, and I identify as female, and I look female. Women are gaslit.
So talk to us about that.
It doesn't matter where I'm coming from. I do feel very strongly that that women are not perceived as being reliable narrators of their own experience for a variety of reasons. Professionals will say that you are hormonal, that you are, I guess, dramatic or needy. That was one that I went up against. Are you getting enough attention from your husband? In fact, we talk about being gaslit. I think I do need to talk about the degree to which I was gaslit and where I was gaslit.
Please.
I mean, I was gaslit absolutely everywhere. The 2 most significant issues here, and I'm going to say the name of the hospital, and I'm not mad at the hospital, and it's like I'm not kind of I don't come at anyone like, shame on you, so much as, I'm asking for understanding, and I would love to see a change. And I'm going to tell you the hospital. So I was a patient at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, which is largely considered one of the great joint hospitals in the world. I just went in a kind of endless cycle of a diagnosis, an MRI, an epidural, physical therapy. It culminated in a hip replacement, and they put the wrong prosthesis into my leg. And I jumped off the table after surgery. I was 38. I was really energetic, and I couldn't get my both feet on the ground at the same time. I had been a dancer, performer, and I quickly said to the surgeon, I think something's gone wrong. And he said, oh, the soft tissue just needs to soften. And I was not believed. And finally, he just said, it's only a half an inch. I mean, you're a pretty girl. I mean, look you're a pretty girl, and it's really possible. And by the way, the hospital to this moment does not believe in chronic Lyme disease. And the last time I was there, they asked me, a 15-page practically, intake questionnaire. Have I ever, gotten shrapnel in my body? Did my parents have glaucoma? It's a joint hospital, and nobody asked if I'd had an exposure to a tick or if I grew up in a tick endemic area, or, and it's really important to me. I'd like to see in my lifetime that our joint hospitals, where they're doing all of these replacements, I believe that they're replacing a lot of joints that might never have needed replacement had those patients been properly treated.
I think there's no doubt about that. Let's stay with the first theme that you were developing, which is your gender. We've interviewed many women on this podcast, and we've almost universally come to understand as male co-hosts, Matt and I, that women are gaslit in almost every medical experience that they have. And as the father of 4 daughters, I certainly see the world very differently now that I've parented 4 daughters than I did before I began to parent 4 daughters. So what recommendations do you have for our female listeners, or the people who identify as female, in how they can get a better outcome when interfacing with the medical community?
I think the first thing to do is to remember that our doctors are human. They're doing their best. And that if you feel uncomfortable with a doctor, you need to find a different doctor right away. You have to trust your instinct. If you feel that you're being talked down to, no matter how many references this doctor has or how much money you're paying out of pocket. So like the assumption is, oh my gosh, I'm getting great care. I look at the bill is $400 or $1,200, it doesn't matter. They're offering an opinion and you are the authority on your body. And the other thing that you can do is to try to come in maybe as a collaborator. If you suddenly just have a wall, then you also need to say to yourself, I may need a different doctor, because we all now know that, if you have a Lyme infection, you have so many systemic issues. You're going to need to work with someone who's collaborative, who thinks outside the box. And I hate to say this, but you can't have an egomaniac really, or you're probably not going to get your needs met. So I wish I could offer more advice.
So one of the arguments you're making is to have a sensitive trigger and to pivot to another doctor. Another recommendation you have is to develop a collegial relationship with your doctor, where you are partnering together and you are giving input based on your onboard diagnostic system to the doctor, right? So those are 2 strong recommendations. Okay. Now, you had many doctors gaslight you. Do you believe that, as someone who identifies as a woman, that you were gaslit only by men and people who identified as male? No. Or were you equally gaslit by doctors who were female or identified as female?
I'm really sorry to report that I was gaslit by both. Absolutely. To tell you the truth, a gynecologist, I think it's useful to report all symptoms so that people don't feel alone with some of the grisliest. There was a time where I had a numb vagina. And so I running to my gynecologist. At the time, my younger child was, had recently sort of let us know that, that they were transgender. And the doctor knew this. I think, I don't know why the doctor knew it. Maybe I can talk about it in my intake or something. And I said, I think something's causing this numbness. It's not my clothing, it's not the position I'm in. I think something's causing it. And she said, maybe your vagina is identifying with your transgender child, and this is a form of solidarity of sorts. And I said, are you sure it's not being caused by something? And she said, well, it's unlikely. This same doctor, this is years later, when I said to her, I in fact have Lyme disease. Every year when I return to this doctor, do you know that she says to me, without fail, oh, Isabel, I am so ignorant about Lyme disease. I always hope that you'll tell me a little bit about it. This is a woman who's delivering babies. Now, she could be ignorant once, but 8 years in a row, that's willful ignorance. And that was not a man.
So let's talk about mindset and mindset controlling cognition, because regardless of the doctor that you went to many, many doctors over many years, from many different disciplines and many different specialties, who were male or female or identified as male or female. So there was just the response was the same regardless of discipline, specialty, and gender or gender identification. So there's got to be something else going on here, right? And I'm wondering what your feeling is about mindset and the mindset of the doctors that you are interacting with, both from the standpoint of the way they perceive patients and the way they perceive patients who may have Lyme disease. And do you believe that's really the bigger issue here, which is that their mindset is controlling their cognition, and they simply can't see it either because of the way they're trained to interact with patients, because of the time they have to interact with patients, and because of a disease that does not have a definition?
Well, you've really touched on two very real elements, two very real factors. I think that right now there's a greater awareness of functional medicine, integrative approaches. I am mildly disheartened, though. I do know some young people who are in medical school right now, and if you say that, if you say, I was speaking to a young medical student who had a sudden heart problem. And I said, and the student was a maybe 21-year-old male, grew up in a super Lyme endemic place and had a sudden heart problem. And I said, you really need to consider Lyme carditis. And I was met, just with such hostility. Of course, I just backed off right away, because one of the, pieces of advice that I know I'm supposed to wait till the end of the podcast to dispense, but and it is one of my greatest lessons is I don't feel that it's necessary for me to convince anybody about this. They need to somehow come to it. I really feel that it's up to our medical schools, our medical societies, places like the IDSA, people who set the agendas, because doctors by nature do want to help, but they can't help if they weren't even given sort of the skills to think about these things. Then, of course, you add on, the fact that they can be sued so easily. I think a lot of doctors are really scared to make the wrong diagnosis. especially if there isn't clear empirical, data. And the lawsuits are like a separate podcast issue. And our siloization of the bodies, the way the medical system has, there was one point in my life where I was no longer a writer and no longer a performer or a singer, but I was seeing a doctor for my vagina's not numb anymore. I just want to make sure
Congratulations.
in case anybody worrying about that. Gosh,
For letting us know, Isabel.
yeah, I mean, just in case there's concern, I don't want anyone to be distracted by that one. But I was seeing a doctor for my sesamoids, the bottoms of my feet, my ankles, my knees, my hips, bilateral carpal tunnel, bilateral ulnar nerve, spine, neck, cognitive issues, Meniere's disease. So you can imagine, as a singer, I suddenly went deaf. What that horror could have looked like. Suddenly Bell's palsy. That's nice as a performer. Half my face froze before a film festival once. Just God, it's been a long. It's funny. I'm so far now from those points of trauma, but those points of trauma, of course, have made me who I am. So your original question was, what's with these doctors? First of all, a new generation is coming, who have seen their sisters, mothers, aunts, uncles suffer, and they are maybe being motivated towards the research lab, towards offices where they themselves will be the agents of change. And I do think that there's a certain intransigence, when you've learned a certain way, there's a kind of brain that's inflexible. I heard a doctor once say, and Daisy, it maybe have been Dietrich Klinghardt. I don't know exactly. You'll tell me, Daisy, if you think this is true, that mercury in the brain can cause a stasis of thought. And every now and then I kind of wonder, do these doctors themselves have Lyme disease and they have a buildup of mercury and they just can't, they've got a stasis of thought. That's my compassionate.
But Isabel, they do have a stasis of thought because they have limited cognition, right? Because our cognition is controlled by our mindset, and our mindset is going to be controlled by definition. And I'm interested in your reaction. We're going to talk a little bit about, again, Yale and the role that Yale played in in this process in a number of different levels, especially when we get to talking about congenital Lyme and the work that you're doing in that arena. But let's again, we'll bookmark that for the part of the conversation that Daisy's going to take you through. Let's stay with definition for a minute, because here on this podcast, we've had hundreds of experts, some of the world's leading experts, share in long form podcast their perspective on this epidemic. And we've had almost as many definitions of Lyme disease as we've had people on this podcast. We've had doctors shake their finger at me and tell me Lyme disease is an acute or chronic infection caused by a single strain of a single bacteria. And then we've had doctors give various other definitions. One of your favorite doctors, Dr. Phillips, in fact, the man I think, again, I don't want to foreshadow too much, but the man who diagnosed you describes Lyme disease as Lyme plus. We've had doctors call it a polymicrobial infection. We've had doctors like Dr. Alan McDonald say we need to divorce from Lyme disease because it is a disease without a definition, and we should be rolling it back to terms like borreliosis or anaplasmosis or auriculosis. And so we have as many definitions from the experts in this community as we have people in this community. So we've decided here at Tick Boot Camp that we're going to define the disease. And we define Lyme disease as a polymicrobial, multisystemic, chronic infectious disease. And this chronic is really important because if you do not have a chronic illness, you do not have Lyme disease. So we don't have to have this debate anymore about whether or not it can be chronic, because it is only chronic. So I want to ask my friend, Isabel, what is your reaction to the Tick Bootcamp definition of Lyme disease? And do you believe that if doctors had a definition like the one that I've just given to you, that they may have been able to diagnose you, who presented with migrating multisystemic symptoms, who was chronically ill, and may have had the ability to diagnose you if they had a proper definition of this disease controlling their cognition?
I think it would have been a significant help if the established Western canon medical community did adhere to your definition. I know Dr. Horowitz, who we all know calls it MSIDS. In fact, I constantly say to people when they are reporting on somebody with, this is how sometimes an elderly person will be described: a grandparent, an uncle, a great aunt, and uncle. Oh, there's so much wrong with him. We don't even know where to start. The minute I hear that, I would say, well, I think there is a place you could start. If there are so many things and you don't know what's wrong, that's a real tip off. So I think your definition is excellent.
Well, thank you.
Call up the DSM writers immediately.
So we, one of the things we see in this community, and you even hinted at this earlier in our conversation, is that people with Lyme disease are better at diagnosing Lyme disease than doctors are at diagnosing Lyme disease, right? Phyllis Bedford from the Limelight Foundation calls Lyme disease the supermarket disease because you're more likely to be diagnosed in the supermarket than you are if you walk into a doctor's office. And I think the reason that's the case, and I'd like your opinion on this, is because those of you who have been on the journey understand that it is a multi-systemic disease. You understand that it's only a chronic disease, and you understand what it looks like. So in so many cases, and a majority, I will tell you, Isabel, on this podcast, the majority of the people who have been diagnosed with Lyme disease, in most cases, were diagnosed by either a person who had been on the journey themselves or by a family member of someone who's been on the journey, and it was suggested to them that they need to consider this disease before their doctors considered it and before their doctors are willing to test them for that. And I think that's in large part because doctors have limited cognition as a result of not having a definition. And those of you who have been on the journey do not have any limits, and you can see what's before you. Give me your reaction to that.
My reaction is that I just take exception with one ending word. You said that those of us on this journey have no limits. I would guess that, like me, because I always think the one thing that my parents probably told me a million times that I was exceptional, and the one thing that I've learned in my life is that I'm not exceptional.
Well, I'll side with your parents, but we can debate that later.
That I represent many people. And I was raised to revere doctors. I'm from a traditional Jewish family, and sort of the punchline to a lot of jokes that I grew up with were like, who doesn't want their son to grow up to be a doctor? Or my son, the doctor, my son, it was you, and you revered your medical experts. My parents served on boards and raised funds for their doctors. I actually had tremendous faith, and one of the hardest things for me to do in my life was to reject my doctors. And it was a transformation that is common to most Lyme patients. And it's what sort of, builds this great grit that we all end up with, because, if we haven't been broken by it, and there are those who unfortunately are broken, we are made, we are just made, more persistent, more creative, more imaginative in how we will heal ourselves. And that's because we didn't have an option. So it's not like, oh, we just are limitless. We become.
No. We are limitless. You are limitless. You are exceptional. But and I have to again compliment you, because you took this to the next area that I wanted to go with before I asked you the question, which is, on one side of the coin, we have doctors who have cognitive limitations as a result of working without a definition. And on the other side of that relationship, we have the cultural limitations that we all have, which is doctors will make us better. Doctors have all the answers. Doctors will have the pill. And as a result of being set up, we do not take responsibility. And again, responsibility is not a dirty word. It means respond with ability. But we lose the capacity to respond with ability and to have a healthy relationship with a medical professional, because we are culturally and I think educationally put in a position where responsibility is a dirty word, and we're not given the tools to cognitively understand that we can respond with ability, and we have an onboard diagnostic system, and we have the ability to partner with medical professionals to together get to a point where we can diagnose and come up with a treatment plan.
Yeah. I mean, that's what is required.
All right, so let me. I have a couple more pieces I want to discuss with you, and then Daisy's going to take you through your diagnosis and your treatment journey. Can you give us a list of all of the symptoms that you have, right? Because one of the challenges that we have in the Lyme community is not only are we gaslit because of our gender or gender identification, but we're also gaslit because because of a lack of a definition, but we're also gaslit because we have these migrating symptoms. We have multiple symptoms and we have migrating symptoms, and it almost looks like, here she comes again. She's got another problem, and it's not even the same one that she had before, right? Because this is a multi-systemic disease and it is a migrating disease. So can you give us just an outline of all of the symptoms that you presented with to doctors before you were diagnosed?
Okay, yes, and right before I redo my list, I must tell you a quick story, and that is that I kept going back to my my physiatrist. That was a word that I didn't even know there was a profession for someone who diagnosed sends you elsewhere, but that's, so my physiatrist was a lovely woman, beautiful woman. She looked like a supermodel and friendly. And I would come in and she'd say, okay, Isabel, so what's wrong now? And I'd say, well, it's my neck, my hip, and my elbow. And she'd say, okay, so, but which one is the worst? And I say that, no, they're all really bad. In fact, I'm also leaving out my foot, my foot and I don't know, my head. And she'd say, well, we know it's one thing at a time. So I'd say, but why? And she would just look at me and say, Isabel, because you do need to choose, like this was some joke. So there you go. That just, just like right to your point, these migrating, and I had, these were different things that I was told that I had: degenerative disc disease, tendinitis, depression, anxiety, sensitive skin allergies, PMS, mono, middle child syndrome. Right, those are just things I was told. That's not what my symptoms. So that's not wrong. I mean, that's wrong. As far as my symptoms, I had thyroid issues. I had drenching sweats. I had cervical lesions all over my cervix. I had sesamoiditis. I had Meniere's disease. I had bilateral carpal tunnel syndrome, bilateral ulnar nerve syndrome, spastic bladder, heart problems, eyesight problems. I think I mentioned the Bell's palsy and disorientation, difficulty with word recall, which I still struggle with, and the inability to think successfully. What I want to say is sort of as a writer, let's say you're solving a plot, you have to think, I call it kind of vertical thinking, from high up to way down deep. You have to come up with an idea. I could really only think horizontally. And at that time, I actually left sort of the thinking world and I worked as a personal organizer. It was the only thing I could do because I could only interact with what was in front of me. Just to kind of just talk about like where I was before I received treatment, and obviously I'm here on your podcast, so a lot has happened to transform where I was to enable me to be where I am now.
I'm going to ask you to pause there because Daisy's going to take you through that portion of your journey. So let's to highlight now this transition that Daisy's going to take you through. You said that you were diagnosed at 42 years of age. So you suffered.
48.
I'm sorry, 40 years of age. So you suffered likely 40, if not 40, at least 32 of your 40 years on Earth at that point. And I'm now going to turn you over to Daisy, who's now going to take you through your diagnostic journey and your treatment journey.
Okay.
In some ways, I would like to possibly also include, because Isabel is so cognizant of children and mothers against Lyme, that there is an aspect of her journey that includes her diagnosis and all of the different pitfalls through the beginning of her diagnosis, as well as both her children. And I'd like to include that, although this is not their story, it is her story. But I know how incredibly prevalent and important that part of the journey is to Isabel's diagnosis and to Isabel's journey. So I want to give Isabel permission to not just talk about her journey and her misdiagnoses, but her children's and sort of the generational conversation of Lyme disease, the vertical transmission of Lyme disease. This gives me chills when I say it, that she is so well aware of, you are so well aware of, and that you have lots to say about. So I'd like to open the conversation about your diagnosis and all the different misdiagnoses, all the different doctors that you saw and that you have seen, and I want you to also include your children in this conversation.
Thank you, Daisy, because that is the salient piece of how I came to understand my diagnosis. My firstborn, born in 2001. So I was obviously already very sick at that point, except that I was sort of still kind of, I hadn't completely crashed. I was carrying on. She, by 2, I began to worry, is she on the autism spectrum? She didn't want to walk on sand, and I had that immediate panic. Oh my God. And I kind of looked in the pool one day and she was bobbing up and down, and I went and grabbed something and she kept bobbing up and down like 45 minutes later. And I said, I think that might be ADHD. And what does this mean? So I think that she was already manifesting symptoms before she was bit by a tick at 4. I called the pediatrician. I said, what should I do? Should I send the tick somewhere? She said, that's all bullshit. And if you see a bullseye rash and flu-like symptoms, bring her in. Otherwise, you forget about it. I forgot about it because there were neither. You're both familiar with this story. She then, at the age of 4, so right before this, she had her, her ERBs and scored in the 199th, 100th percentile. And all of a sudden, my child began to have extreme sensory issues. Enormous anxiety attacks, just panic attacks. I couldn't figure out what happened. I took her to therapists who said that I had been divorced, but I was divorced very young in my daughter's life, and to which I attribute Lyme disease as the cause of divorce. My husband was an avid outdoorsman and was annoyed that I couldn't keep up anymore on the hikes, and was frustrated by my depression, and to this day does not believe in chronic Lyme disease. So his child's life has been marked by it. Lily, my daughter, was hospitalized when her knee blew up one morning, and pediatric orthopedist I took her to, sampled the fluid, and I said, wait a minute, my daughter was bitten by a tick in October. This was now May. I think knees, isn't that Lyme disease? And he just said, I'm not some quack, we don't diagnose that way. So she was hospitalized. They cultivated the culture of the fluid, and sure enough, it was Lyme disease. And I thought, thank God, this is great. We know it's wrong. So they gave her 2 weeks of antibiotics, which obviously on this podcast, you're aware that, if she was bitten in October and treated with 2 weeks of antibiotics in May, that would never be enough. And it is my firm belief that she was born with it, and that bite sent it into hyperdrive. And then, so the avalanche began with my firstborn, and then there was my next pregnancy, where I found out at my 36-week sonogram that the baby had failed to thrive in utero. And I was sitting on the table in the sonogram, in the office, and I had to meet a friend for lunch. So I was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? She said, well, there's been a failure to thrive. I thought to myself, failure? Well, I'm a Yale graduate. I'm a published author. I don't, listen to me. I don't have time for failure. Like, what does this mean? She said, well, you got to come back tomorrow for another sonogram. And I said, well, I don't even live near here. I don't, what happens if I don't come back? And she said, yeah, well, the baby could die. And I all of a sudden I understood a crisis was happening. And it was, I then did give birth. I induced my own labor. Actually, I took some herbs that I had sort of heard might bring on labor, and they did. And I didn't have an epidural, and I felt the head come out too small. I knew from my other child what a large baby's head was. So my child was born with microcephaly. And I had to ask myself, okay, well, what happened here? And it was that mission of trying to piece together that, the diagnoses then went on. The autism spectrum disorder, the expressive receptive language delay, the PANS, PANDAS, POTS with my other daughter, PCOS. I want to say that my younger daughter's gender journey is, it's either, not related at all or totally could be related. This is an area where I really would love science to step in and take a look. I do hear from quite a significant number of women, because they just find me, that they're noticing this as sort of a companion issue. And I don't know whether it's related to the Lyme, I can't, or to Bartonella, or to some other thing, or to being, I don't have any idea, but I do see it. But, I was having my health tsunami, the children are having their tsunamis. When Dana, and so I already even knew that my younger daughter had Lyme disease. It never occurred to me that what she was going through, her eyes weren't working, she couldn't concentrate. And this, it didn't occur to me that it could have anything to do with Lyme disease, or what happened when I carried them. Again, shouldn't my Park Avenue gynecologist, OB, have told me? So Daisy, yes, it's not that I backed into my diagnosis, which many, many women do. I was devastated that my children were struggling. And as I began the podcast saying, I kept having these seizures. And so and unfortunately, everybody who's had one knows that, you can't decide how you're going to land. And maybe the second to last one I had was on a subway. And I began to understand that I could be on the platform and it could be the end of my life, or I could sustain brain damage. I began to understand that I might be incapacitated. And again, I want to just say, we haven't even gotten to the fact that I run a support group for women, for moms, but many of those moms report a real panic. What if I'm unable to take care of my sick children? So my quest led, by accident, Dana Parrish diagnosed me. And I said, no, Dana, that's sweet, but the one thing I know I don't have is Lyme disease. You see, my doctor said no. And she said, Isabel, let me see your records. And there was a positive CDC diagnosis that my doctor ignored because he just said they're always wrong. And he tested me again. The next one came back equivocal. So he just ignored it. And in fact, so Dana Parrish is the person who introduced me to Stephen Phillips, Dr. Phillips. And he said, I don't even need to wait for your blood work to come back. You have a CDC positive right here. I confronted my doctor and he said, you're going to let some quack with an office in the middle of the woods, tell you got some crazy thing. You're going to take doxycycline. Yeah, good luck if you don't come running to me if you get a sunburn. That is what my doctor of 14 years said to me.
So, Isabel, two things come to mind. And one is, did your diagnosis, which you say was at 48, and what was going on with your children kind of correlate? Did you figure it all out together, or was it staggered? And how did those puzzle pieces come together for you?
I was, I think probably in that initial appointment with Dr. Phillips, that was the first time that I remembered that I was bitten by a tick when I was 8. So there was at that time a kind of like psychic bomb that exploded. And I liken it sometimes to somebody who found out that they were switched at birth. They were raised by one set of parents, but then they suddenly discovered they have another. All of these things I had learned about myself over the course of my life had to be reassessed, and the whole narrative of my life had to be reassessed. And I began reading, and so it wasn't right away. I think right away I thought this must have impacted my younger child with the failure to thrive in utero. I even asked at that very first appointment. No, I didn't even ask. The doctor actually said, I have a number of patients who are gender dysphoric. I mean, I know that, he's not a specialist in that field and wouldn't ever say that there's any definitive correlation, but I remember it did come up. So that's where I got the idea. Oh, I carried these children. I then started reading Daisy. I mean, of course, I watched Under Our Skin, but I read and read, and while I was reading, it all came together in little bits. But you know how the memory works. The memory is funny, so that you can remember 12 things that happened over the span of your life at the same moment. Like it's like a giant Rolodex can happen. It's funny because as a writer, and Daisy knows I've written a memoir called From the Mother Born, and you're limited in language. You have to just write about one thing that happened. You can't actually capture the way the mind connects dots. But I began connecting things from my childhood, like a friend who suddenly became anorexic after a hiking trip in Switzerland, or in one case, Daisy, I remember one of Stephen Buhner's books on Bartonella, and he wrote that, he wrote about Bartonella rage, and he also wrote that osteomyelitis could be caused by Bartonella. And two things happened. One, I began to think, oh, my mother had a really hot temper back there in childhood, and oh, I had a sister who had osteomyelitis and some learning differences, and obviously had ADHD, but back then we didn't have those words. We you were either a dreamer or you were hyperactive. Like, we just didn't have diagnostic words in the 70s. And I all of a sudden I started to piece together that there could be a case to be made, should I feel like making it, that perhaps my own mother was infected and that we all either got it from her or acquired it ourselves. But that line of thinking made me then think about my own children. And then I began to see all of my neighbors. Oh, the mom and dads, I was thinking at that point, Jesus, I don't want to grow old because everybody I know has Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, ALS, cancer. Jesus Christ, what's with the neighborhood? What? And then, the parents had problems. The kid, I started seeing the generational span, and I couldn't stop seeing it. I still can't. I can't stop seeing it. I'm seeing it all over the place. So that is very much how then all of a sudden I just said, oh my God, the kids. And I got them tested, and for my older daughter, of course, we knew that she had Lyme, but oh my God, that panel lit up with mycoplasma pneumonia. She'd been on steroids for quote unquote asthma. She didn't have asthma. She just the list in fact, the list of things my children were misdiagnosed with. And also that I was told by one doctor, and I think I forgot to get back to this. I was just told by a doctor that my daughter's behavior was a sign of my divorce. Or that perhaps I should think about my mothering skills.
So this leads me to ask, a couple questions, and you can answer them in your own order. But how many different diagnoses do you think you all had, and what are some of the bullet points? And how many doctors do you think you all had, or how many doctors did you see collectively?
It's an uncountable number. And so that's the answer. The different diagnoses were OCD, ADD, ADHD, later pandas, POTS, PCOS, expressive receptive language delay, dyspraxia, autism spectrum disorder, you help me with this one. Come
Trichotillomania.
on. When you say it?
Trichotillomania.
Trichotillomania, that's pulling out your eyelashes. Rashes, eczema. Those are the greatest hits. And of course, the bipolar disorder diagnosis for one of my children, along with during around the time of COVID, after her fourth infection with COVID and a concussion, an experience with multiple psychotic episodes. Again, I share this because many of my mothers are dealing with this as a child who's in a psychotic state, and that's actually like the state they're in. I'm sort of not being sort of dramatic, or floral in the description, like they're disassociating, they're hysterical. Some of my mothers actually are, unfortunately, being attacked occasionally by their children who are out of control. I mean, bodily safety is a matter I'm asked to offer counsel on pretty regularly. In my own case, that was not an issue, Daisy, but and Richard, this is so I'm sorry, I'm just thinking, you said it, that's a pretty intense list. My children are 14 now and 21, and they're dealing with issues like, will they ever be able to have children? That's a pretty significant sort of thing to be grappling with at their young ages. And that hurts me a lot. I mean, I just have to take it in. I don't know that things hurt me. They just are a fact of what we live with, along with things like, how will I educate my child? How will my kids stay in school? This isn't, again, it's so common to the population that I work with. How, they can't think straight. Again, Daisy knows my daughter, how extremely smart my daughter, one of my children, is just a brilliant girl. And junior Phi Beta Kappa at her college. I'm super proud of her, and hanging on by a thread to stay in school, because when she is sick, that girl cannot function. And our university healthcare systems are not set up to understand Lyme. These kids are coming in, they're engaging in self-harm, cutting frequently. They don't know how to handle their symptoms, and if they're being asked at these university healthcare centers, do you feel like you're going to shoot somebody? Do you think you would kill somebody or kill yourself? If the answer is no, you're generally handed a pamphlet on mindfulness and told to call a provider in your network, in your insurance network. And that's why I really call upon, the hospitals, the healthcare, our safety nets have a lot of holes in them. A lot of holes in them.
So, Isabel, you say that the first diagnosis was by Dr. Phillips, and then sort of at that time is when you had this kind of almost kind of like your life flashing before your eyes, where you saw the amalgam of your entire history and family. And so at that time, did you go into treatment with Dr. Phillips? And what kind of treatment did you begin? And at that time, at the same time, did your children go into treatment? And what kind of treatment was that?
Okay, part one, me. I immediately, Dr. Phillips is a very good, strong believer in an antibiotic oral route treatment. He had me doing pulse therapy with variety of antibiotics. At the time, I think I also took Mepron and possibly fluconazole. I'm trying to remember. It was a trio of things that I would do every 3 weeks, then stop for 2 weeks, and start. I want to say that, within weeks, the brain fog lifted and my arthritis lifted. It was unbelievable how immediately I responded. I then, in short order, did take the kids, I believe, up to Dr. Ligner in Pauling, who is a very thorough diagnostician, and we were able to get our arms around the children. And in fact, my husband, we, at a certain point, I think one of the children or both were with Dr. Elena Frid in New York City for a brief time. And they did not have quite as successful an experience as I did. And their lack of success with the traditional route of antibiotics is what pressed me on, Daisy, to look elsewhere. So my kids couldn't handle the antibiotics and were continuing to fail. And so it's as if we were like they were like broken cars on the side of the road. And I thought, how am I going to get them back on the highway? In a kind of solidarity, I stopped all of my antibiotics. I studied herbal medicine. I went to Ottawa and I studied with Stephen Buhner's partner, McIntyre is her name, Julie McIntyre. And yet, I couldn't seem to have the magic touch. I then found a practitioner who diagnosed kinesiologically. And that was really, really game-changing, because she didn't need to take blood work. And so I could take my needle-phobic children to get diagnosed and treated. She treated with low-dose immunotherapy, and she used various lasers. Some of them were really great. Some of them didn't do anything. She also recommended many supplements, and which we still take many supplements. And of course, the lifestyle changes that I really do firmly believe are helpful. Figuring out how to get a full night's sleep is really important, and something that's really elusive for a lot of Lyme patients, and has tremendous repercussions. How to clean up a diet you already thought was clean, and to consider everything. I didn't believe at all that EMFs could be harmful. For me, they weren't, but I know Lyme patients who would have nonstop headaches in New York, in cities where there was too much exposure. So it was through that doctor that I tried an amp coil. That was not a good treatment for me, but I'm saying I really had to figure out how to cure my children without antibiotics. And, I was terrified. And then we moved to California in the middle of the pandemic. And I didn't know what to do. And I was introduced to Daisy at the time, and Daisy has really continued to educate me in regards to the many different ways that you can approach this disease and this infection, and all of its sort of syndromes and infections, and the mold issues, the companion problems that we all know about. And that's been extraordinary. And whether it's doing IV treatments, or, I mean, I still have to say that though I see different practitioners for different perspectives, you know, like I try to keep it really open. And also practitioners who are sort of preventative. Their focus is on prevention, which I'm a really big fan of, you know, like getting ahead of the crisis. That's been something that I'm eternally grateful for, Daisy, and that we continue to look for ways to help my kids. And yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, and you know, people think like, oh, he's going to give you a tincture or, you know, some super out there treatment. You know, he actually put me on one time a very strict antibiotic course to handle something that was a problem for 10 years, and he managed that symptom. So, you know, different doctors have all things in their toolkits, and that's why, you know, I think I should have said this earlier, Rich, to your sort of question about sort of how I would guide people now. I guide them to get a broad view and to learn options. And that if one option doesn't work, first of all, give something a chance, you know, like you know, at the first hurts, don't jump off the boat. You might need to adjust the dose. You know, maybe you got a micro dose your thing, maybe it's too much, or maybe the wrong antibiotic, you know, but, you know, so be patient. If you determine that the treatment is no good, then, you know, there are a lot of different options out there and ways to approach having a manageable life. And that is, I think right now at this time, the best that we can do until research steps up.
What a beautiful account. So would you be able to tell us, for yourself and for your children too, what kind of gains you have made in this very long and arduous journey? If there are gains that you can point to for yourself and for them, and improvements, and what things might be responsible for some of these gains?
I think the very fact that I have a fully completed manuscript about my experience, that I was able to think clearly and realize this book is called From the Mother Born because the news that I need to share with the world is that this infection is congenital and has really, really a myriad of consequences on generations. Like I decided, you know, I almost feel like Paul Revere. In the fact that I could think clearly through 375 manuscript pages is a great testament to the healing journey that I've made. And I made a lot of that with you, Daisy, and with your guidance. But I don't want people listening to this podcast to think, oh, I don't have access to those people and I could never get in, and that, you know, I won't be that person who was able to finish a project. I don't believe that at all, because a lot of the things that have helped, well, some of them are really outside the box. This is true. And some of them are not. You know, I had to be really brave for me and try the antibiotic, the IVs. That was like something I was very scared of. The thought of putting something right in a vein was scary. And there have been times where some of those treatments leave me kind of flat on my ass. And what I've discovered, to my great relief, is that I really am able to keep going. Like, you know, you could be flat out and just think it's all ending, except it isn't ending, and it just doesn't end. body is just kind of miraculous. Mine has been. I have a lot of gratitude for this body of mine. That was part of my journey towards healing, was to stop being so furious at my body, especially my brain, and conquering the anger is a really big piece of my healing. In fact, I want to say that someone else founded Mothers Against Lyme. Dr. Jane Mark and Bruce Fries founded this group called Mothers Against Lyme. But they needed somebody to run it. I just thought they need somebody kind of bossy and good at stopping people, cutting people off. Like you guys probably want to cut me off, but I just knew how to run a meeting because I do. So I was like, oh, I'll run it. And I realized that my special, my ability towards sort of for the community, I'm best, I call it direct to consumer. Some people are their best contribution will be writing a check for research. Some is doing like tick cleanups in their community or, through education. I'm just best working with people. It's funny, I think Daisy, you and I share that, don't we?
Yeah, on the front for me, but yes.
On the what for you?
On the front line.
Well, we are, I think of myself often on the trenches, Rich, just, to clarify this, through Project Lyme, who, God bless them, pays for it all and handles all the social media for me. You can sign up for one of my Zoom support groups, and I support mothers, and it's not because I don't want to support like the whole entire community. I just, there's only, I just can only do so much at this one time. And it's a lane that I just understand, and that a lot falls on a mother's shoulders. And, mothers are the ones who are most observant usually of their kids, and just don't give up. Like they just keep going. And it's really been the most healing thing of all.
Yeah. Now, Isabel, I know that Rich and you are going to talk a lot about the transformation piece, and I just want to take a moment and put a little hold there, like Rich likes to say, but I just want to back up a minute because he and you are going to go into that at length, and I want to hear all about it. But one of the things I'd like to hear about still for you and for your children is what's that?
The healing. I forgot that part.
No, I just want to know, what are some of the things that worked? I mean, my experience as a Lyme advocate, as a health advocate, is that no two Lyme patients do have the same response or the same transformational healing with the same treatment, which is maddening for doctors, for patients. They're always saying, well, what did you do? And what did you do? And then as an advocate, they come and say, well, so-and-so did this and so-and-so did this. And it's, well, that's very well and good, but I don't think it's going to work for you. And so, but I think we learn from each other by learning what's out there, what happened to be good for you or good for your kids. And so I'm always really interested in the things that were transformational for you and the things that and I know there's never one thing. People are always like, what's the one thing that got this person better? There is never one thing. But I'm interested in the things that did move the needle for you and your kids.
Because there were multiple fronts that we needed to tackle, Daisy, I have to almost break it up into like our emotional neuropsych area, then maybe the GI piece, and then sort of body parts that needed aid, because there's so many buckets here.
And I also want to say that when I ask that question, I don't mean to be asking, are you done? I mean to be saying that have are working, but that you are still achieving, because I think all of us in the Lyme world, we're still achieving.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously just an ongoing project. It's not, that's, by the way, Rich, you mentioned early up, the idea that, you mean the 10-day course of antibiotic isn't it? Like, I'm not better. I mean, that was mind blowing to me that, I remember Dr. Phillips saying to me, I think we're going to get you back on your feet it's going to, probably 2 years and you're going to be there. And I just couldn't even adjust my brain back then. And that was years ago. So, Daisy, the things that have helped. I want to talk first about the depression front, because when you're depressed, no matter how brilliant or accomplished you are, depression is a monster. You could be at the height of your life and get a repeated message, thank you, possibly Bartonella, that you really should kill yourself, that the world would be probably a little bit better if you were not in it. I myself have had that compulsion. In fact, as I watch these famous people, out of nowhere, they, take their lives, I always wonder if Lyme played a component. So I think that the most important thing to tackle in my life was that extreme depression, treatment-resistant depression, to be specific in my own case. And then I think, for the one of my children, the word was bipolar. These are all just like words, to describe symptoms. And so I'm nervous about sort of the labels, but after trying virtually every neuropsych, every SSRI and mood stabilizer,
I can attest to that.
I mean, every single one of them. I'm currently holding steady myself on it's a cream of Daisy, you help me here.
Oxytocin.
It's oxytocin cream. It's that simple. Oxytocin cream. And it's very concentrated. So I think it's a little bit higher of a dose than what you would get. I think you can get like oxytocin nasal spray on Amazon. This is a higher concentration of it. I rub that cream into my skin every day. And I'm currently taking maybe like a very, very, I'm very sensitive. So I can only take pediatric doses of anything. I mean, I microdose rifampin. It's like everyone's microdosing mushrooms. I'm microdosing rifampin. I'm microdosing methylene blue. It's like, yeah, Daisy knows. I can't. I just very sensitive. I can't handle a lot, but I need to keep going. And this is when I say you make adjustments. We've finding for the kids, for one of my kids, we went through Abilify and Latuda, and even now I'm nervous that I think, she's worried the Lamictal may be giving her a rash. We're always on it, but I am myself encouraging of pharmaceutical intervention or other intervention for depression, because it can end in your death. And the world needs you. And there is not a, like, you don't sort of win an award if you muscle it through without. And so I do encourage, like, there's sort of a stigma around it, especially parents with their children. I know kids with the most horrifying anxiety, and their kids are like, well, we're not going to do the Prozac thing. And I think, well, I mean, would you rather have a dead kid? I mean, it's like, they're not aware that the suicide rate is the highest it has ever been for our teens and our young adults. I mean, they're killing themselves. So that was, Daisy, obviously, like, I just had to start right there. You have to get that neuropsych piece. And by the way, there are many nights where I cannot sleep unless I take Ambien. last night I didn't sleep with it. And that's because I cross time zones so much. I travel a ton for work. So I know that if I don't get enough sleep, I just crumble. I've tried peptides lately that I think are really an interesting direction to go in. They're kind of like a new area, and I can't really say what they're doing entirely, but I feel really good. What are the treatments? Something interesting for my children was something off the internet called Lyme nosode, Lyme nosode, Japanese knotweed. These are kind of tried and true. I take a lot of supplements. I also take like things like, again, people might have like a stigma around it. I take Valtrex every day. And because I know that these infections, trigger all those HPV infections. I take that. I take, Daisy, you can help me here. It
Tried
depends on
E,
what's going on.
You-
What all the things I do.
you did SOT.
I did SOT. I have to let you know how that's going. Like I said, I had a very high Epstein-Barr reactivation after I had COVID. By the way, after I got COVID, unfortunately, my blood thickened. So I became kind of stroke risk. I take Bolucki every day. And sometimes I add lumbrokinase. Both of them are available on Amazon. I take various phospholipids.
You had a tonsillectomy.
I had a tonsillectomy. I also had cavitation surgery. I really like, the only thing that not the only thing, I haven't tried ozone therapy yet, and I've heard great things about it. I'm about to try for the first time IVIG. And one of my children has benefited enormously from IVIG. Intravenous gamma. Can you tell me what is it?
Immunoglobulin. Yeah.
Intravenous immunoglobulin.
And you've tried IV antibiotics.
I've tried IV antibiotics. Some of them, were too much for me. Some of them, like I said, literally cured my spastic bladder, which is a horribly painful thing to live with. I was, curled up in a ball over that one, just thinking I can't live another minute with this pain. I always am supporting my gut, and I am largely, the dairy, gluten, low sugar lifestyle, except I'm not militant. And that's also a big piece for me about sort of what things have helped. Yoga has helped a lot. Regular exercise has helped a lot. Getting rid of haters has helped a ton. Surrounding myself with love, finding allies. Having a partner, in my case, Daisy is my partner, and in other cases, I am the partner, I companion others, but this is a scary road with so much uncertainty in it. And then, just when you recover from one thing, like, oh, my hair finally has grown back after it's got sort of fallen out in handfuls. You're like, oh, my hair is great, but now my abdomen is, now I have Bell's palsy of the gut. You've got to be kidding me. And sometimes I have to vent. And so having a person to vent to, who maybe isn't your husband or your mom or something, like, just someone outside who really can get it. It's been part of the healing, as like, along with all of the things I've tried and that I will continue to try. And I'm tireless, and I'm kind of like, I'm brave, I'll give it a go.
You are brave. You are. Brave. Well, that's certainly a good list of things that you've tried. And I'm very excited to hear Rich lead you through your transformation and his final question to you.
Thanks,
So
Steve.
let's pick up on a couple of things that were really, I think, implied here, but I want to build out a little bit with you, right? So when you and I last spoke on this podcast, we talked a little bit about teams. You had said to me, you need to build out a team, right? And you need to have a diverse team, and you have to have a lot of people who are going to be giving you input. And you did reference that you're working with Daisy. And one of the things that we as East Coasters, you and I, Isabel, probably never heard of were coaches, health coaches, Lyme coaches. We never heard of coaches, right? And I can tell you that when I first started hearing about coaches, 2.5 years ago, when we started this podcast, I raised my brow and I was like, what are they? And who would ever want to use them? And now, now we see how, we see the beauty of this group of people like the beautiful Daisy White, who are filling that gap for us, where they're doing two really important things. The first thing that they're doing for us is they become the person who's helping us through this journey. Because what we all know as we study the hero's journey is we always find a mentor. A mentor always takes us on this journey. And then when we get to the end of our journey, we have our second journey. We become the mentors for other people. And you two beautifully describe that process that we all go on this hero's journey, right? But we really need someone to take us. We need our Yoda to take us through this journey if we're going to have that shortcut. And that's the first thing that we have with really good coaches like the Daisy Whites. Now, the second piece of this is of course, they fill that gap for us. Not only the Yoda who's taking us on this journey, this person who's leading us that we find on our hero's journeys, but they're also helping us to negotiate this very complex system of when we have to pivot, who we should be working with, when we should be pushing a little bit harder, meaning maybe we shouldn't be babying ourselves, but maybe we shouldn't be gritting it out, right? We need somebody to lead us on it. So you can talk to us about how Daisy has been a vital part of this plan. And as an East Coaster, you weren't accustomed to having people like Daisy available to you.
Well, I had definitely never ever heard of a health coach, or even it's quite popular now to have like a health concierge. And I mean, I just didn't even know where to turn when I came out here. I didn't, my neighbor down the road told me about Daisy, but Daisy came to me also through the ghostwriter or the writer with Yolanda Hadid on her book, happened to be my cousin's fiance. So there was sort of double roads that led from me to Daisy. And I think that it's like a growing industry. And if you don't have a health coach, I definitely recommend having a designated friend, like somebody who's in agreement to be like the recipient of your terror and sadness as you work through grief and anger, or to celebrate victories that sort of like somebody not on the journey wouldn't understand. Would my girlfriend who doesn't, share my issues understand that I recently realized that by not eating steak, grilled meat, the horrible bloat finally settled down. I was so thrilled. Like, who cares? Nobody cares, what though? Like, but I was able to call Daisy and say, Daisy, oh my God, you're not going to believe this, because I thought that I had made this miraculous realization that the paleo diet is the answer for me, but it was, then it was not the answer. And I found this new thing, but who are you going to celebrate those victories with? Who can understand the significance of those victories? So that is sort of a reason that well, first of all, it's hard to navigate all these things. It's so confusing. When you're really sick and your brain is not functioning well, you can't even understand what's coming at you. And often you're managing, it's not like in my case and with the population that I work with Mothers Against Lyme, there's so much happening. They have a child who maybe has a feeding tube or can't swallow, has Tourette's, severe OCD because they have pandas. The the strep is in their across the blood-brain barrier. They themselves are exhausted. They are dizzy, or they have ringing in their ears. They're too tired to cook. Their child has autism spectrum disorder. They don't even know what school can accommodate them, and and their house has mold, and they also have to decide whether to pay for an IGeneX test or to pay their rent. And then they're supposed to negotiate, what? I'm sorry, what is even infrared sauna? Like, is that like an outfit? What is that? Like, there's too much. And you need the guide. You just need someone aside who's not as close to it as you, or possibly your spouse or your best friend, just can kind of say, all right, look, we're not going to tackle everything at once. So we are, I hate to sound like the reductive doctor, who said you could only have one problem at once. But in fact, there's such a tidal wave that you do have to sort of say, all right, deep breath.
Yeah, you need your guide, right? Because there are a number of different challenges that people have, even under the best of circumstances. We have an acute care system and you have a chronic illness. You're being introduced to a new community that has its own language. You need to find people who can understand you, and you need somebody to coach you. And there's no team that has a coach that doesn't have a coach that's going to be successful. If you were building a football team or a softball team, you would have a coach, right? And it's the same thing when you're going on a journey like this, that you need someone to help you and coach you through these challenges. To be, again, use the Star Wars metaphor, you need your Yoda to help you to get through this.
In a funny way, I suddenly realized, Daisy, that it's probably the work with you, though ours was kind of a family journey with you. The work that I'm doing with my mothers, I can't do what Daisy does. I mean, she's literally helping me make doctor's appointments, and as the liaison, and does just God's work entirely. But again, there is a cost to it, and a lot of the people that I'm working with just can't afford it. It's not going to be an option for them. But within the community itself, in these groups, and I know that I have a group, but that there are many groups, so I'm saying it's my group, but like a group, people are helping each other. People are playing that. I just know, because people in my group say, like, oh, in my other group, and so you go looking, and you can even find that person. That's why I always just say, like, I don't want anyone to ever think, oh, Isabel has Daisy, but I don't have Daisy, I'll never get well. But that isn't true, because you can find that system, you can find that support.
For sure, right? I mean, look, there are a number of different resources, and this will be another conversation, but certainly we here at Tick Bootcamp want Daisy to scale herself and start to train other people so we can have more Daisies. But that's a conversation for another day. But there are a number of different resources like this podcast, right? I mean, the reason we do this podcast is we want people to have different tools available to them so they can get the support, and they can find the people that might be able to help them. They can learn the language. They can, they can find people who speak to them, and then they can find their shortcuts, right? And one of the things that was beautiful about the conversation you and Daisy were having is you were sharing your shortcuts, you were sharing your tips and trips, right? Because in the end, when you look back at your journey, there were things that you would have done differently if you had the opportunity to do it again. And all the things that you would have done differently, now the people who listen to this podcast can now learn from those lessons, right? So that's And again, it's a quilt. We have to have a whole set of people who are now becoming leaders, which is now what you've become in this community. Not because you're doing this podcast, and you have really blessed us and the people listening to us by sharing your journey, but also with the other work you're doing. So let's talk about the beauty of Lyme, right? Let's talk about how Lyme disease has put you in a position where all of these constructs that you walked around with, whether they be cultural or social or educational, that you were walking around with, Lyme gives you an opportunity to strip off all of that away and to really find your essence and really find your talents and your gifts. And you shared a little bit about some of those things that you found. You said, for example, that you were the person who was uniquely qualified with your gifts to do the work you're doing with Mothers Against Lyme. So talk about how you discovered that about yourself and how that call was something you now answered.
I think from childhood, like I was even sick. I was the class president and the camp team captain. And so I think leadership is sort of the personality trait. And it's hard to know how leadership plays a role in your life after you leave an arena where there are clear leadership opportunities. Do you run for office? What does it mean? Or you lead a company? But I was aware that I had these skills. And also I did mention that I'm from a traditional Jewish family. So a particular Jewish value that I was heavily steeped in, it's called tikkun olam. And the idea is that your sort of core of our religion is to repair the world. So, or doing mitzvah type of work. So that's really a core part of like the foundations of my, just my basic ethos, that what makes me, me. And somehow, somehow I ended up Generation Lyme, Project Lyme was doing support groups for people in their 20s called Generation Lyme. So any listeners who are in that age group should definitely check out Generation Lyme. They're no longer a part of Project Lyme. They stand on their own, but they have, I think, podcasts, definitely, support groups 5 days a week for sure, if not more. They're on Instagram. And I thought hey, maybe we should just try a mother's meetup, because I was making some speeches. I was speaking, I'm a writer and I'm a public speaker. I started being asked to speak publicly at the time when I was supporting my younger child on her gender journey. I accidentally ended up as a kind of a public speaker, supporting those kids and the reality of their existence, and sort of publicly being a mom saying, I love my kid. And so I learned that I could do this. So I was doing public speaking, and except you don't get to speak publicly very often, do you? You need to have a podium and an event. But the essence was sharing ideas. So I said, hey, why don't we do a mother's meetup and see what happens? And first of all, the first meeting, I just thought maybe we'll have like a couple, maybe 5 or 6 people, except the first meeting, 75 women signed up.
Wow.
And all I could do was just ask their names. So in fact, what I learned was that in addition to being a good speaker, I discovered that I'm a good listener too. And that listening was as healing in many ways as any words I might say. That I'm suddenly feeling a little choked up when I think about what I'm privileged to hear. You as a podcast host know this experience, to hear someone else's struggle, to let them know they are not alone. In some cases, I have to be the bearer of bad news, especially for women who want to get pregnant or who sometimes are pregnant. I have to sometimes share horrifying news that there are no guidelines at the moment, that, we have ways to go. I sometimes have to ask people, like, the best thing to do is to call your representative, but mostly connecting with other people, hearing, loving them, doing the opposite of gaslighting, just saying, yeah, you I've even had women in the group who have said, like, I'll always just say, what's on your mind today? What's led you to the group? And I've had one woman who said, I'm here because I hate my daughter. Her disease has ruined my life, ruined my marriage, and I said, and she said, I'm so mortified. And I said, you've come to the right place to express that. It's not, you're not a monster. That is an emotion that we feel. And, it's certainly better to say it here in this group than to tell your daughter or because she doesn't really hate her daughter, but she needed a place that was a place to say something that everybody, acknowledged or unacknowledged, has had a moment, because of the fear that we live with, because of the helplessness that we live with. How do you channel the helplessness? What if I never cure my kid or there's all of that doubt. And, that's why I was joking in the beginning of the show, how I accidentally just started singing at the end of, one of my meetings, and everybody ended up laughing, smiling. Gosh, to take a group on that journey, or when we end with the serenity prayer, which we often do, just, gosh, it's worked for AA for years. So I figured I'll just throw that one in, and to end knowing you're not alone is, and that people maybe have ideas you haven't thought of yet. It is so healing. I actually feel that this year, I just made a little infomercial for the Project Lyme Gala about congenital Lyme disease.
It was beautiful, by the way, folks. I did have a chance to preview it, and I can't wait until the rest of you have an opportunity to see it. It's really, really a beautiful video.
I think bringing that one particular aspect to light, congenital syphilis was once the scourge, and Borrelia, of course, is very similar to a syphilis spirochete. And I don't know why, the first report of congenital Lyme was in 1985. So this isn't sort of some new newsflash, but the CDC has on their website, wonderfully, they acknowledge that congenital Lyme is a reality. The one piece, and I don't blame them for doing this since they don't have enough data, but they report that it's rare. And my worry about that word, which I of course understand why it's there, but I'm not seeing that it's very rare on my support group. I'd say that 80% of the women in my support group, week after week after week, report passing Lyme disease on to their Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, their infections, onto their children in utero with occasionally catastrophic and at the very mildest terrible consequences, lifelong consequences. And I'm really hoping that we get some guidelines and specifically guidelines about treating during pregnancy. How do you treat a baby that may have been infected in utero? How do you test a mother? Because the diagnostics may have to change. Your body changes in pregnancy. So I'm greatly concerned for that population. And I don't have great news on that one, but still, the making of that video, it's funny. And the leading of these groups helped me finally come out of a state of shock that I think I went into when I heard the sonogram technician say there's a problem. There's been a failure to thrive. I think I went into a 14-year state of shock. And through community, I healed. You just feel it. And then you have no other course but to give.
I want to thank you for being a leader in the Mothers Against Lyme community, because it really is an important community. And I didn't understand how important it was until we were recently asked to write a review about a soon-to-be published memoir that was written by a mother who was a guest on this podcast. And I'm not going to share a whole lot about that because the memoir is not yet released. But one of the things that I found to be really painful when I was reading the book before writing the review was that this person was truly alone. Her mother thought she was crazy. Her sister thought she was crazy. Her husband, who's a good man, who's a really good man, was constantly doubting her and questioning her. And even her children, who she was working to treat, were doubting her. But in the face of all that doubt, and in that face of all that lack of support, she ultimately did triumph. And she was ultimately successful in assisting her child to go from being very, very sick to being unbelievably successful and independent. So I can't wait till that happens, but it is really important because moms are so often alone on this journey and not even supported by their children's father in many cases. So let me ask you about that, Isabel, because it's one of the things we've observed not only just on this podcast, where we've had very few dads on this podcast, but another observation that Matt and I have made is that we have had thousands of people from around the world reach out to us. And early on in our journey, we had the opportunity to have Zooms with folks. Unfortunately, we're just too overwhelmed now to be able to do that. But only on one occasion did we have a dad call us and reach out and ask us if we would give advice. The 99% of all the other people who had reached out to us and asked us if we'd be willing to speak with them or meet with them were moms. So why is it that moms are isolated in this journey in so many cases, and B, why are they so aggressively advocating for their children and not getting support from their children's fathers?
Well, I mean, you only have to look at a pride of lionesses to know that we are genetically programmed through millions of years of coding to ensure the survival of our pride, of our children. And it's the women who are taking down the water buffalo. Usually, I think the men are, they're like on a rock, roaring or napping, and they're necessary. I mean, we love our lions. No disrespect, men, and I've met some unbelievable dads. And also men who are sick and come forward and talk about it. Why so many are unsupportive? Maybe it's an issue of that sort of kind of patriarchal mindset. It's not manly. Chronic disease isn't sort of manly, or it's inconvenient. It bogs us down, and men are kind of like moving forward, whereas women were the traditional, the gatherers. That more often than not, the women are giving up their careers, and the men are sort of considered the more important sort of asset. But of course, oh my gosh, there's so many women who are just working sick and have a sick kid. It's going to take a shift that it's actually going to be up to the people raising the next generation. It's certainly not coming from our all of our leaders. Maybe in eras past, we looked towards our civic leaders to teach us these things, or maybe our pastor or our rabbi or our yoga instructors. I don't know, but how to live with compassion and trust. It's going to be person by person, and the men who are unsupportive and the women. I again, this is very hard to talk about, but I think important to talk about. There have been family members, who maybe past family members who have just thought I was a lunatic. As you mentioned, this woman. I mean, it just hit me hard. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that Daisy's been with me when I've sobbed at the names I've either been called to my face or that have come back to me, that people even haven't said to my face, but behind my back, I just know everybody is talking about it. I think that if we are calm in our resolve and the way we communicate to our spouses, that may help. Sometimes when you're sick, you become hysterical. I hate that word, but that you become desperate. You're vulnerable and you can't get answers. Your voice may get higher. You may, so that idea is, my wife is hysterical. And like they just slam the door, or, maybe if we can find it in ourselves to say, you keep calling me crazy. And I don't think that that's very productive, because there's clearly something wrong. My research on my own leads me to conclude that this is what the problem is. And it would be really great if, even if we're not on the same page, if you could refrain from denigrating comments, because nobody's going to get healthy that way. Maybe if we can gain that language, we will liberate ourselves from that experience of being occasionally abused, is the right word, but disrespected.
Well, let me bring it back to another part of the conversation we had before we come to our final question, and that is, one of the things we've seen often in this podcast is the downstream effect of gaslighting. You and I had a very powerful conversation about the gaslighting that you've had to face from doctors. And one of the downstream effects of medical gaslighting is, in many cases, it puts fathers in a position where they think they have evidence before them that their child is not sick, that the way that their child's mother or partner is responding to the child is not consistent with the data that they have from these healthcare professionals that we trust. So can you talk a little bit about how the downstream effect of gaslighting from medical doctors is not only having an impact on us as patients, but it's also having an impact on those of you who are parenting and trying to get to a place where you are listening to your child, you believe your child, you're trying to come up with solutions for your child in the face of your child being gaslit, and how that gaslighting is now impacting your capacity to gain the support you need from your child's father.
Here's the thing, this is a really common situation. And I'm sad to report that many marriages implode under the strain.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that children from a young age, if they're gaslit, become they suffer from really bad low self-esteem, depression, anxiety. Like, it's all exacerbated because they're not believed. I don't know why this is. I've been asked this a lot. because I supported a gender atypical child. You know, why did I believe, how could I believe someone if they're 2 years old who says that they're, you know, a girl and not a boy, you know, how could you even believe them? You know, I'm not, you know, if there's just like persistence on your child's part of certain behavior, I'm not really clear what you gain by not supporting them. You know, like I'm not sure, like, is there an upside to repression or suppression? And, you know, it seems very old fashioned to, you know, father knows best, to just say, it seems like, you know, what?
Or doctor knows best.
Or doctor knows best. You know, it's just, I think that it's so important to, I said that I learned so much in the support group that I could listen. Listening and observing is so important. Maybe men are busy like watching the evening news or distracted by their work commitments. I mean, I don't know.
Or their cognition is being controlled by the mindset that's being created by the gaslighting from the medical community.
If I could sort of have one wish come true, I would like tour medical schools and get all of these young doctors and just talk about this so that they could stop rolling. It's like the eye rolling. If I in the face of this, it's such a life hijack. It's so hard without the gaslighting. It just would be so amazing. And it's like, I think that one of my next goals as an advocate will be following Project Lyme's lead here in public service announcements. You know, it's going to be like a media campaign. I think about it all the time. How can we combat this? It's not just in the Lyme world, you know, it's we have big problems, and it's going to be hard for any one sole person to handle it. You said, you know, you're just so deluged with people who are interested in your podcast. I mean, you can't even interview them all or respond to them all much as you wish you could. And in that sense, we have to trust that we are part of a community and that the members are sort of self-selecting. Like I said, I'm best to consumer. Bonnie Crater is great at organizing a fly-in to Congress, boy. You know, she's a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
You know,
and we have the duty to encourage other people and to train other people to become leaders. As we talked about, our second journey is to serve the community by scaling and encouraging others, right? And that's some of what we do here at Tick Bootcamp. We are constantly encouraging folks to start their own podcast. And several of the folks that we've encouraged and supported have done that, and they're doing great work, right? And the same thing, Daisy is encouraging people to become, you know, advocates in the same way that she is. And now you're in a position where you can begin to now, you know, support and develop, I think, the most important people in this journey, you know, in this community, which are moms, right? And I do have some good news for you. I don't want to end this podcast on a somber note. I want to end it on a very positive note, right?
okay.
And there are a couple of things that I do want to share with you about the observations we've made here on Tick Bootcamp, right? One of the things that we found really sad at one point on this journey is we interviewed Dr. Alan McDonald, who is one of our favorite people in the community. And Dr. McDonald actually proved that congenital Lyme existed in the 1970s and the early 1980s. And he was talking about gaslit. He was gaslit by one of the leaders at that time in the medical community from Yale University, interestingly, who suggested that he was actually doctoring his data. He gave a presentation in Vienna with proof, which he called the dead baby study, where he was able to show that babies were dying in utero as a result of contracting Lyme disease. And when he tested these fetus, he demonstrated that they had Lyme disease, right? And he was accused of doctoring that data in the 70s and 80s. That's where we were. Now let's fast forward to now 2022. Dr. McDonald, who wasn't able to get his papers published in the late 70s and early 80s, is now being given access to all of the major medical journals, and he's publishing his findings that couldn't see the light of day. Because he's able to publish these findings, they are now becoming the standard of care, which is now being developed around us, right? Second thing that I think is really exciting is there are a lot of moms like you and Daisy who are doing great work in this community, two of whom are running foundations that are giving grants, right? Live Lyme Foundation and Lyme Foundation. And they've been able to look at the data that's available through their foundations, and they've been able to demonstrate convincingly that 50% of their grant recipients are congenital Lyme patients, right?
Yeah.
So we're getting anecdotal proof, we're getting research proof, and now we're starting to see changes in the CDC. And yes, I know you're not happy that the CDC in their language has indicated that congenital Lyme is real but rare, and or something to that effect. But before the brilliant founder of the Live Lyme Foundation, became as active as she did and was able to get access to the CDC and the NIH. What the language was that congenital Lyme disease does not exist, right? But we're now starting to see these changes happen very quickly. And the last piece I want to share with you and our community is that it is universally accepted in this community that a downstream effect of a tick bite is congenital Lyme disease. It is universally accepted in this community that Lyme is sexually transmitted, and it is universally accepted in this community that that you can get Lyme disease from a blood transfusion. So now science is going to catch up with all of that, but the people who are in this community and who are living this are now universally accepting these truths, that there is an upstream and downstream effect of Lyme disease. And it's one of the reasons why we have this explosion. And the good news is now people, because they're learning that and accepting that, are learning how to take steps to protect themselves. And there are many young women who have come on this podcast and have talked about the protocols that they've developed so that they can be healthy and have healthy children. And we've now witnessed many of those young women who were on our podcast before they had children now have healthy children as a result of going through protocols where they went through a process of prehabilitating before they got pregnant, using certain types of antibiotic therapies and other types of therapies to put themselves in a position where they can have healthy children. And several of them are, again, active on social media and demonstrating that this is possible. So this is where we're getting to. It's been a long haul. It's been a painful haul, but there's huge reason to be hopeful and to expect that that we are going to develop protocols that are going to allow women to be reproductively healthy despite having a Lyme disease journey, whether theirs themselves is congenital or as a result of an upstream tick bite. So I would be remiss if I didn't point all that out, because I am really hopeful, and I do believe that we're going to be in a good place. Again, because of wonderful people like you and Daisy and so many others who are doing great work as moms in this community. So now I get to ask my final question, Isabel, because that's what I get to do. And this is something I've never asked anyone to do, but you did share with us that one of the things that you do as a singer is that you sing out your meetings so that people could leave with a smile. And I'm going to ask you to do that for us today, because I want everyone to leave this podcast with a smile. So as the singer-songwriter that you are, can you please share with us? Can you share with us a song as a way of winding down this podcast?
Let's see. This is one that I share with my group and I sing with my group. Listen as your day unfolds, challenge what the future holds, try and keep your head up to the sky. Lovers, they may cause you tears, go ahead, release your fears, stand up and be counted, don't be ashamed to cry. You gotta be bad, you gotta be bold, you gotta be wiser, you gotta be hard, you gotta be tough, you gotta be stronger. You gotta be cool, you gotta be calm, you gotta stay together. All I know, love will save the day. Sometimes I sing that with my ladies. I wish love was enough to save the day, but I do think that research, science, and by the way, I'm going to add one person. You mentioned Phyllis, you mentioned Phyllis Bedford Holiday, Goodrow, and Olivia, Live Lyme, Limelight. There's a woman in Canada who is my hero, and her name is Sue Faber from Lyme Hope. And she's just a force to be reckoned with. You know, like those women are my heroes, and I hope my partners. And then the last thing is probably, if I know that I'm recovered because I'm singing again. So that's a sign for you, because there's nothing that lifts me up more than song. So I was happy to share it with you.
Thank you for listening to our Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Isabel Rose. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Isabel Rose, visit her Instagram at Isabel Rose 19. Second, if you've enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends on social media, on all your social media outlets. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick Bite blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com/bite to view the blueprint. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. To get your automatic episode updates of your Tick Bootcamp podcast, please take a minute to leave us an honest review on your podcast platform of choice. And finally, if you'd like to search our podcast library of almost 350 episodes, subscribe to our email list, or share feedback, please visit our website at tickbootcamp.com. And thank you always for listening. And I send a big hug to all of you in our community at large.